Welcome to Kentucky Horsepower, the official podcast of the Kentucky Automobile Dealers Association. Hi, and welcome everyone. This is Jason Wilson, President of Kentucky Auto Dealers Association. Welcome to another edition of Kentucky Horsepower, the official podcast of KADA. And with me today is a familiar face, Kevin Tynan, who's talked to us throughout the years, as well as our convention. Kevin, how are you? I know you're bleary-eyed coming in from Vegas.
Yeah, hanging in there. I'll probably collapse in the next couple hours, but for now, we're good.
Well, we appreciate you being here. And for those either watching or listening, it's a little bit different setup. This is a ATAE communications meeting that we're having here in Louisville. And Kevin agreed to, ideally wanted him to fly in, but he was coming in from Vegas and he literally red-eyed, just landed a bit ago and agreed to do this meeting because he likes punishment, I guess. So thanks for being here. So you were out in Vegas for SEMA. Tell us about that. What'd you see?
Yeah, so there's two shows. SEMA is the Specialty Equipment Manufacturers Association, and you have APEX, which is the Aftermarket Auto Parts Expo. And it was interesting the past couple of years, and I do a lot of the, they'll have education and forecasting, and they'll have some side meetings. It isn't just walking around looking at chip foose designs and things like that.
Right.
And the past couple of years of attendance was way down through the pandemic. Obviously, there was no show in 2020. Right. 21 was about a third of what it would normally be, and it's starting to build back up. I'd say it's about 3/4 of the way back. But like a lot of the education classes will always be about, preparing your shop for EVs or, the coming EV wave. And there was a lot less of that this year. And it's interesting because as I do this and I try and feel like I'm up to the minute on what's going on in the industry, like, if I think anybody who's coming out talking about EV adoption and the pace and it being imminent is probably, a week or two behind the times, which is like a lifetime. Right. So there at SEMA, what I noticed that there was a lot of, first of all, it was all truck, right? It was every Jeep, Bronco, 150, Silverado, Sierra, like you name it, it was a truck. And there was a ladder with a tent on top of it. It was just all this customization stuff for trucks. And SEMA would typically be exotics and classic cars and all these builds and custom paint and custom suspension and engine swaps and all these things. And it was just all truck, which is, we've talked about it a million times going back the past 10 years. That's what the industry's been. And the other thing I saw that there was a lot of wheels and tires, right, which is about customization, and audio systems, not so much head units, but speakers, subwoofers, amps, and then again, the outdoorsy camping kind of thing, which just shows that, this is an industry that just isn't really ready for stamped devices that all look the same because they're techie. I mean, people will always want tech, but they also want that individuality and customization and freedom. And I think it's interesting where the consumer goes to find those things, right? Yeah, everybody drives a truck, but mine has, a ladder behind it and a tent on top of it. And I have these custom wheels and my sound system will, kill my neighbor's lawn. Like, so I the idea that, because that's my, what I've been saying about Tesla, they're not an automaker in the sense the designs are the same because it's about the ease of production, stamp out the body and put it on the skateboard. And then you make a SUV, which is just a little taller of the same body on a skateboard and you send it out. And I just don't think there's so much about the auto industry that's about individuality and freedom and fashion and your individual statement. And I don't see that changing for a really long time. There, look, the middle of the bell curve is like my wife per se, who doesn't really care, but she does. She couldn't tell you what engine's in it, what, she knows she likes the color and it's big and safe and it gets her where she needs to go. So there are a lot of people that would probably put up with a point A to point B device. But I don't think as a culture, we're ready to make the transition to, gray jumpsuits for everyone.
Yeah, that's a good point. And look, against that backdrop, in the context that you just laid out, we've seen some OEMs pivot to some degree as far as this full speed ahead on EVs. We're going to hit these numbers by these certain benchmarks in Kentucky. Ford just announced last week that they are holding on the second battery plant in Kentucky, plans for that until things develop a little bit further. So with what you just said and have seen, what we're sort of hearing a little bit from the manufacturers now, and as we head out of 23 and into 24, and again, to your point with we're not all in the gray suits, which is maybe that would have been good information to figure out a couple of years ago. But
I said it then.
You did. So, but with all that said, where's this take us now? We're entering in this sort of uncharted territory from the standpoint of, these are mandated type things that we're dealing with as far as this EV goes. The public is tapping the brakes and saying not so fast. So where's that put us in the next 18 months?
Yeah, really interesting time. So, and I'll probably submit my 2024 outlook early next week, and it'll publish. So that's, right where my mindset is right now, looking through 2024. And, basically what I've been saying is that the 2024 plans in terms of product are mostly set. But if the profit and demand dynamics of EV don't improve significantly by the end of 2024, you're going to start to see some adjustment and walk back of those plans. And then as soon as I started saying that, everybody started pulling back their plans. So I was right. I just missed it by a year. I thought this would happen this time next year, and it's already starting to happen. So, you just can't, as I look to 2024 and I write my outlook, it's really this simple. And I may have sort of tied this together just after the June conferences or conventions that we did. And I was just in Minnesota, great group in Minnesota last month or September. And the walk is simply this, right? So my presentation now is basically, look, 10 years of truck over car mix has been wildly profitable, but you have a lot of automakers, mainly Ford, GM, and the Stellantis brands, who are sort of maxed out, right? Ford is 99% truck in this country in terms of retail revenue. Stellantis is in the 90s, low 90s, so is General Motors. So there's not a whole lot of mix shift left for those companies.
Right.
So now you're looking for your next revenue and profit driver. And I think the world, for lack of a better term, the media, the markets, the governments, competitors all thought that next logical step was electrification, EV. Problem is, as a manufacturer, you want day one profitability. So on the day in 2013 where automakers said, hey, you know what, if we do another truck and one less car, that is profitable on day one. The problem with that same concept when you apply it to EV is like, well, it's not day one profitable. It may not be year 10 profitable. So now you have this ready to jump to this new profit driver transition that's being forced by media, markets, government, whoever, and it's not profitable. It makes it very, very messy and bad business. So I think what you have is the manufacturers are at this sort of crossroads of like, okay, how do we drive revenue and profit higher? The answer is not EV. What is the answer? And I think the answer is going to be a couple steps back to hybrid and plug-in hybrid, which will make sense for more consumers. It's not as onerous on buyers in terms of transaction prices, that premium you'd have to pay, closer to profitability for the manufacturers. And then the other thing I think is that you're going to start to see leveraging software packages, whether it's advanced driver assist systems. And I think that was a similar situation that we saw with electrification. The idea was we're going to go from level 0 to level 5 overnight, right? And we'd all have self-driving cars everywhere, and it would be mayhem. And I think now we're starting to walk that back and say, you know what, we can charge this. It's software, so margins are great. But even if we have a good level 2, or Mercedes just was certified at level 3, if we have a good level 2, level 3 package, you know, that's $2,500 a year in subscription. And when you look at the gross margin on those things, they're huge because it's software, some developer expense, but for the most part, day one profitability, which is what you want. So I think that we walk back this like 100% EV tomorrow or full self-driving tomorrow to something a little bit more reasonable. It's an interim step or a bridge, if you will, for the consumer in terms of costs. Same thing maybe for the manufacturers, where it's an interim step that says we don't have to be all in on EV yet. You know, like if you look at Ford reported earnings right before I left, and it was Ford Pro, right? So there's 3 business units: Ford Pro, Ford Model E, which is the electric stuff, and Ford Blue, which is the internal combustion stuff. Ford Pro profit per vehicle was $5,800 in Pro. In Model E, the all electric, it was minus 36,000 per vehicle. So it still doesn't work. And you know, my question is like, all right, so how do you go from minus 36,000, it was actually closer to 37,000, to plus 6? Like, that's a really, really long walk. So it may never get there, you know, and I think the issue is as you look at demand come down, which I've been saying for years, is as much about the supply, right? If I'm going to lose $36,000 per unit on my electric stuff, how many do I want to sell, right? And the answer is less than 0. I don't want to sell any of them. But the concern is, if you're bullish on EV or on Tesla, is that there may not be EV demand. There may only be Tesla demand. And if they're struggling with demand, well, then everybody's struggling with demand, because it isn't about everybody wants EV. There's a group that may want Tesla only, but they don't want Ford's EV. You know, 150 Lightning, I looked at that number. Full-size pickup, right? We've talked about this a million times too. Full-size pickup, largest segment by revenue in the US. Lightning is the only full-size electric pickup. It's 0.75 of that segment, right, in terms of revenue, less than 1%, and it's got no competition.
Right.
So if Ford wanted to really sell it and push it and make money on it, they've had, you know, what is it, 5, 6, 7 quarters unchallenged, and it's still only 1% of that segment. And that price has come down more than 10%. You know, dealers will know, and they're still having, you know, and I did it in just a piece analysis. So prices have come down 10% on Lightning, volumes up like 15%, but for internal combustion, 150, volumes up 24%. So it's actually the mature internal combustion version is outgrowing the EV version, which is coming off this super low base. Right, you should be able to go from 2 to 4 reasonably easy and call it 50%, you know, 100% growth.
Let me ask you a question that I get. In fact, I just a couple of weeks ago took a call from one of my dealers and just asked the question, saying, based on what you're seeing, hearing, you know, I'm tasked or faced with making this invest into my facilities. That's several $100,000 over because of the EV rush that's coming, and to have the right to sell these EVs in some instances and whatnot. So you're a dealer right now and you haven't done anything yet, and you're sort of watching this unfold. What's your take on that? What do you tell those dealers?
Yeah, and we talked about this in Minnesota in September. You know, 6 months ago, 3 months ago, a month ago, I might have said, you know what, just do it. So your dealership is up to date. You've got what they're asking for whatever reason. I've got my level 3 chargers. I'm ready for this EV shift, you know, so you're cutting edge. And now I would say, you know, it's kind of the way I do things around here is like, there's a new initiative and I'm like, I'll be 12th. I won't be first and I won't be last. I'll be somewhere in the middle. And,
Right.
and that's kind of what I'm saying for this transition in terms of that investment is where a month ago I would have said, you know what, you're going to need to do it eventually, and you're going to be one of the dealers that has that capability first. Now I would say, wait, right? It's not happening. And I think it's starting to be realized and accepted that it's not happening as quickly as, media, markets, and governments would have you believe. And look, I've said this a lot too. If EV is not losing $37,000 per unit and it's profitable, the dealers will be the first to know, because Ford will tell you they need you to buy a lot of these things, right? Because it's profitable and they'll want to sell them. So the fact that you can't get them and it seems like nobody wants them is because they don't want to sell them. People don't want to buy them. They're unprofitable. But if that shifts, you'll know, right? You'll probably be the first to know. But going back to the earlier point about taking a step back from, this idea that we're going to go to level 5 overnight, what I've been telling dealers is, I would be more concerned about that software shift and over-the-air updates and the potential sort of squeeze out of service bay revenue that you'd be dealing with, more so than I'd be afraid of a direct sales model shift to electrification, right? And I'm trying to find good numbers on this, but some things I've read or people I've talked to say, oh, this is over-the-air updates were a $3 billion market last year and it's going to 14, 15. And I'm saying, like, okay, now if I'm a dealership and we're going to, because we're not putting the software genie back in the bottle, right? It's only going to become more and more and more and more. And as manufacturers have the ability to send updates or warranty or repair work over the air, like, I'd be more concerned, like, okay, how am I getting paid for that? Am I getting paid for that? If not, how do I get paid for that? And so I think that would be my more immediate concern for, the associations, for the individual dealerships, is to sort of get out in front of that question and say, where am I in this process where you want to go over my head and send updates directly to the vehicle, more so than saying, because we talked about the market, the working capital shift of selling directly at scale. It doesn't, Tesla's showing it doesn't work. It doesn't work for Lucid, Rivian. It's not going to work for Ford or anybody else. You just can't distribute vehicles at scale. You run into macroeconomic conditions where there's a slowdown in demand, and that those built units are in your cost of goods on your income statement. It doesn't make sense. So like I said, I'd be more concerned about what are we doing with over-the-air updates than this idea that they're going to bypass and go to an agency or a direct sales model.
Yeah, that's a great point. And look, one thing I want to get your take on as we start to wrap up here is we just had an economist from Cox Automotive sort of address our group and sort of give the lay of the land, if you will, on the financial sectors and what's happening. And I'm curious, as someone that works very closely specifically with automotive yourself and the way you do, where do you see 24 going from the economic conditions? How do you see that impacting sales, whether it be new and used, or how's that all come together? And what's the impact?
Yeah, so I think, and I said this through the summer too, like, I think this industry, so the U.S. new vehicle industry, is structurally smaller than what we're used to. I didn't see what the October SAAR was. I know it was 1.2 million units. I don't know what the adjustment factors were, but whatever. We're running like a 15, 7, I don't know, we're somewhere in 5 for the year. And I think that's probably a more reasonable and comfortable number going forward, a 16 million maybe next year. But the thing that's really important is that, and I talk about this all the time, is that you can't really just look at the volume number, because there's 2.3 million units of inventory on the ground now. So let's say that could support a 16.5, or let's say it even supports a 17 million. There's give and take, right? So could we be a 16.5, 17 million unit market next year? Sure. But you know what it's going to mean for pricing and margins, right? They're going to go away. So it's really a question of what, and that's why I like to layer pricing and margins to an extent on top of volume and create the concept of a revenue pool, right? So I gave the example over the summer. 2016 is the best year ever in terms of volume. It was a 17.5 million unit market at $35,000, was a $600 billion revenue pool. You look at this year, right? And let's say we do a 15.5, but we're doing it at $48,000. That's like $150 billion larger revenue pool. But then you would have people going, yeah, but 17.5 versus 15.5, where did 2 million units go? And look, and that's important for some dealerships or some sort of ancillary industries or sub-industries around the autos that you're saying, yeah, just the number of units matters to me. Whether, let's say you're a shipper, right, a railroad, and you're just not moving as many units. But as a manufacturer and a dealer, selling 15.5 million at 48,000 is $150 billion better than selling 17.5 at 35, right? If you're thinking about it financially. So I think that's the issue, is that don't get caught up on a volume number, get it caught up on the revenue pool number. So my feeling is we may be up in 24 versus 23, but I think it's going to come, the trade-off is going to be a little bit weaker pricing, maybe a little bit more discounting, some incentives thrown in there. So the important metric, the revenue pool, I think is going to have a hard time growing in 2024. It could be flat. I mean, and if it is up, it's only up a little bit. I don't see, you know, that 48 getting to 50,000 average transaction price, you know, with mix the way it is, like we're 80-20 truck car, just not sure how much upside or how much appetite the consumer has to go like 50 average. Yeah, we'll do that. You know, like, and if they do, it's going to be at the expense of volume, right? So now we may only be a 15 at 50, right? So there's, those two numbers are going to play off each other in 2024, where in the past couple of years, we've sort of had both, right? We've had volume increasing or recovering, but price is also going up because of that mix shift. And I feel like we're kind of at the end of that runway where we can't do both anymore. And again, that's where that, okay, what's next comes in. Oh, EVs. Oh, not EVs. Like, oh no. So we're in this sort of window where we don't have the easy answer, right? In 2013, well, we'll sell more of this, fewer of those, right? And that's been 10 years. And now we're at this crossroads that's like, okay, well, what are we going to sell more? What does the consumer have the appetite to pay more for? Can't be the same vehicle that you just charge more for. There's got to be electronic content, software, drivetrain technology, which again is not profitable. So that's out, right? So we're kind of at this crossroads of what's next. And I don't think it's totally figured out yet. So this could be a difficult year to do volume and pricing, maybe one or the other this year.
As we talk about what's next, since I have a group here, does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask while we have Kevin? Does anybody have anything they'd like to bring up or chat about right now?
Hey,
Live TV.
I was thinking of it in terms like holistically the industry, right? There contentious relations between OEMs and dealers, but if you're thinking about the way the used business drives profitability, even for franchise dealers, if we're staying at that 15.5 million, and we like the revenue, we like to run lean, we don't want to do incentives, that's pushing the timeline out when you kind of have healthy supply available on the used side of the market. The average household budget, it's a used car buyer. So do the OEMs think, like, for the dealer network, long-term, you know, self-interest or the interest of the industry, should we maybe be lifting the unit numbers a bit, even if that requires a little incentive, because that's going to rebuild the used business faster?
Yeah, you know, and I don't want to speak out of line for the OEs, but you know, look, I've been saying, like, the OE doesn't, I hate to put it this way, doesn't care about the consumer.
That was sort of my question.
Right.
But
So
continue, you know, the used business is huge, the fixed ops,
yeah,
for the dealers, right?
So here's my take on it, Mark. And we talked about this over the summer at the conventions. we were a 17 million unit market at 30% lease penetration for years and years, right? And a rolling 3 years through 2022, we were 5 million off lease every year, right? Then we get the pandemic. So basically anything leased 19, 20, volume drops, supply demand just go in line, 1-to-1 inventory to sales, and incentives go away, which means leasing goes away, because at the end of the day, leasing's an incentive. So when you look at the numbers, you get to 2025 and you have 2.4 million off lease. So we go 5 million, 5 million, 5 million. I think it goes to 4 this year. 24 is like 3.2. And then what comes back, what was leased in 2022 was like, what was it, a 14 and change at 18% lease pen, you got 2.4 million coming back. So my question is, well, how do used car prices fall? And I think what's going to wind up happening, right? You can't go from 5 million to 2.5. You can't cut supply in half and expect prices.
You don't want to know the scenario, right? It's like something breaks.
Yeah. So what I think is going to happen is, I think that relationship between the dealer and the captive gets even stronger because, you know what your off lease portfolio is, where the product is. So I hate to say this, knowing the Manheim business, but maybe you see fewer wholesale units, right? They go directly from, and this happened, and I'm sure you saw it too. Anything that was leased in 2019, last year, everybody came to me and said, I got this thing coming off lease. And I go, let me guess, you're like a third of the mileage and you got $5,000 of equity in it, you have to buy it. Or you have to at least go to your dealer and say, look, I know I have $5,000 in equity. Let's split it. Let's make a deal. That starts to end this year. But I think you're going to see more of that kind of scenario where the relationship between the factory and the captive and the dealership gets much tighter, that says, oh, here's my off-lease portfolio when it comes to the dealer, or the captive goes out to the dealer base and says, here's what's coming in, put your bids in, and we'll go directly from us to you, and not even let the consumer buy that.
No, that's definitely a thing with direct purchase as well. But,
yeah. So I think
just middle income household and what it costs to buy a vehicle, because they're completely priced out on the new car side.
Yeah, and I get that question a lot, and a lot of the places I speak, somebody will stand up and go, look, my dealership is in an area where household income is below the average transaction price that we're seeing in the US right now. So what are they supposed to do? And my answer is like, I don't think the manufacturer really cares. And that's why Ford is 99% truck, right? There's no Fiesta, no Fusion, no Focus. And it's like, not everybody's a good customer, right? And there's manufacturers. Go ahead.
Give in at some point and go back to, we need an affordable sedan.
Well, you know what? And that's interesting because I was talking about this. Look at what Chevy Trax is doing and look at Hornet, right? But what happens is you have one of those now, because you're right. The risk you run is, I don't have anything for the entry or move up buyer, because look, Ford and GM average transaction is well over 50 now. So what you risk is that somebody entry and move up buyer graduates college and gets a Civic or a Corolla, and then they stay in that portfolio all the way up through the luxury brand. I've been saying, like, I don't, look, you don't want to sell things, or you're going to just have a loss leader, which is going to be Hornet or Trax. And you say like, okay, we'll get the young buyer in, but we don't need 4 of those nameplates anymore. We don't need Cruise and Trax and Sonic and Malibu and Impala, right? So we'll do one, we'll get the people in, and then we need to move them up through the portfolio, because that's what you're risking. You're risking customers entering into a competitor and then staying in that brand because they like the ownership experience over the years. But ultimately, GM, Ford, the cost structure doesn't allow them to sell a whole lot of $20,000 vehicles, $25,000 vehicles. So It's more like you're just not the customer for us, right? If you're ready to spend 50, we got some really nice stuff for you. But until then, we'll hope to conquest you later.
So the headline out of this is OEMs don't care.
No, they don't. They don't. And it's not so much that they don't care, but it's like, I try and tell people, like, put yourself in that headspace, even with your own job, right? You have a task that you can do that costs you money to do it, or you have one that can make you money to do it. If you're a baker, right? You make some things that nobody buys and they lose you money. And you make these great things that are high margin and everybody buys them, and people come to you and be like, you should sell more of those cheap things that you lose money on. And it's like, well, no, that's not why I do this, and it's like that's just how business works. So it's not that they don't care. It's just cost structure doesn't allow them to be in those segments.
Yep. Well, we're up against a hard stop, Kevin, but I want to really thank you for coming in for the benefit of our group here. Let's give Kevin a round of applause. Hopefully you hear that.
Yeah.
And appreciate you doing, especially after the red eye. So thanks again for everything. And to those who enjoyed the podcast, we'll be bringing additional content, and we'll see you down the road.